Hello, I'm in Cornwall this weekend to introduce you to the exciting concept of power bubbles.
It's the conversation that matters. You know, when you're a coach, you can produce all sorts of things, you can ask the questions, and time and again when I was being trained in coaching, everybody said it's the question that does the work, and there's a huge amount of truth in that. Asking the questions do change people's brains. Today I want to talk to you about a very, very important thing, and it's about the damage that happens in coaches, and they can take very easily into their coaching experiences with their clients. And I just want to put a stop to that somewhere. I want you to join with me in putting a stop to that. One of the things I do is I create trauma in the room, because we know that trauma changes brains, and of course good trauma changes people for the better. And I've learned over the last 10 or 15 years how to create trauma in a person's life that really works for them. And of course, when you're good.
Hello, everybody. Today we have Andrew Sercome in the house. And Andrew started 25 years ago with his coaching practice from scratch. He was 47 and desperately in need of a new career. He made it. And through thick and sometimes very thin, has put food on the table, subtle and blatant skills into his knowledge base, and a light sense of confidence into his heart. Truth is, Andrew loves coaching. More recently, after having been offered a six-figure sum for his business, when the deal fell through, he listened once more to his heart and used the same skills to brand and take his business in a fresh direction. Andrew has created dozens of highly successful and powerful tools to rewire brains to cause people live a happier and more fulfilled and satisfying life. Andrew, welcome on board.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to invite me to do this interview.
Actually, I've been waiting for your interview since, a very long time. I think people will really enjoy this interview and this episode. And the first question that I want to ask you is that, do you think that most people who you meet, most of the people that you meet, do you think that they're happy with their lives in general on a professional and personal level?
That's a too general a question for me to be able to answer neatly. I think there are some people who are perfectly happy with and content with what they do. They find it very fulfilling. They're not the people who usually become my clients, as it happens. There are other people who live in a state of significant turmoil and don't know where they're going, don't know what they're thinking, have been messed up by their background, don't have any real vision or sense of purpose for themselves, and live literally from day to day, hand to mouth in their day-to-day life. So, I think there are both sorts of people, and my job as a therapeutic and personal development coach is to particularly help those who just want some help and are really looking for it. And they're the people who are sent to me usually by the medical practitioners around here. So, yeah.
So like people who come to you are sort of aware, Andrew, that they need to take this kind of action. And these are not the only people who I was referring to. I also am asking you, when you're walking down the streets, when you're, meeting people here and there on your trips, what is your observation? Do you think that most of the people around you are rather on the happy end of the spectrum or the unhappy end of the spectrum?
I think they have numbed themselves to what is possible. I think inside people in general would rather stick with the status quo than take too many risks and risk the current happiness or level of happiness they have. So they don't actually do too much to disturb that, keep things as steady as possible and don't disturb things too much. And of course, that's one of the things that coaches do is we invade that and do our best to help a client to come beyond that numbness and come alive again inside themselves.
What is it that has caused people to behave in that way, Andrew? To numb, you said they numb themselves. What do you mean by that?
That's an interesting question, Doug. I think there's a social element to it. I think there's a spiritual element to it. I think there's sometimes a physical element in terms of their actual world and their actual lives. But I think there's also, we live in a culture, a world culture, that seems to be pouring cold water, if you like, over anything that's too adventurous or too out there, or the uniqueness or of the individual, and that's a real grief to me. I want people to feel alive as an individual person, and to know that they have a contribution to make, and there's nobody else in the world that can fulfill that contribution in the way that they can, because it was designed and made for them to fulfill. So I think it's to do with the social and psychological and spiritual environment in which we live in the 21st century.
Wow. You think we're growing into that direction more and more as the time goes by?
I really do. Yeah, I think people who have an independent spirit, people who are proactive, who are sparky, are less easier to control. And I think in our world today, there are people who are very keen on controlling the world. And for me personally, I don't do that very well.
Yeah.
I don't do being controlled very well.
I know you wouldn't do that very well. So I mean but that's pretty dangerous, Andrew, when you say that, because what you just said is that people are sort of not welcome to become who they really are or express their uniqueness. Society will not welcome or applaud that. And if we're growing into that direction, then does that mean people will need what would they need to make, a sort of change in that direction for them, because they'll be pretty wasting their lives that way.
Yes, I think you've summed it up a treat. I think that's exactly the way the world is going. I think there are people who are not aware of that. They are not given time to think. They are encouraged to be working all the time, earning money all the time, spending money all the time, living high pressure and long lives, particularly in the West, where we are expected to be proactive all the time in so many ways. And I think people need time to think and mull over and decide how they want to be. And that's one of the lovely things about coaching, because when I sit people in my chair, which is just over there for our conversations, I'm digging around, asking all sorts of questions and not accepting any neat status quo statement. So yeah, I'm good at asking questions.
All right. So most of the people who are going to be watching this episode are actually busy people, Andrew. Can you describe to them, like, what does it look like when you make a decision that you're going to be putting time to think?
I think there's a sacrifice to be made for that. Thinking takes physical energy. We know that about 10% of our body's energy goes to just thinking. And that is quite a demanding thing for people. They're not used to that. I think we have been lulled into a situation where other people make all those choices for us so that we don't have to. I heard a comment recently where it talked about we will own nothing and be happy. And I think, of course, my question is quite simply, okay, so who is going to own it if we don't own it, But I also think that applies to our individual lives, that we are reluctant to own our thoughts. We are reluctant to own our physical world and our lives. And that produces unhappiness. Our sense of control is so important.
Absolutely.
That sense of individual performance. However, I recognize that there are some people who are not very good at that. Maybe they don't have the intellectual skills for that or the education for that, and they don't want to commit themselves to that. And they're very happy just to go down and do just some fairly mundane, menial work. And I'm not knocking that at all. I think we do need that. However, the trend towards more and more people doing that, I think, is a very unpleasant and suspect one.
What would you do, Andrew, to help yourself be in the thinking vibe and not be dragged by whatever roles all of the people around you want you to play? If I can say that.
Yeah, no, you're very good at these questions. I must be careful what I say to you in the future. I'm asking others. No, I think what we have failed to grasp in the coaching therapeutic world is just how important trauma is. What happens is we always associate trauma with bad things, a motorbike accident, car accident, losing a loved one, those kind of things. And of course, that's what I call bad trauma. But there's also good trauma, and good trauma involves things like, well, some people would say winning the lottery was a good trauma, or getting married to somebody you are passionately in love with is good trauma. It is a traumatic moment, that day when we build up to it in terms of a traditional wedding, don't we? And so it's good trauma. Having a baby is good trauma, generally speaking. So we need to understand that trauma isn't just a negative thing, it's a very positive thing too. However, trauma changes our brains significantly. When I'm working with clients, I like to create some sort of trauma in their head, a psychological trauma that is going to jump them off the rails that they've been on, so that they can no longer psychologically do that. That's the kind of one of the tools that we use, is how to get people off the rails. Push them off the wall. People say, sometimes describe me, they say Andrew is off the wall. And I can't think of anything better than being off a wall. Who wants to spend their lifetime on a wall like Humpty Dumpty? And off the rails, we need to be off the rails. But the rails are very, very determined to hold us in place and take us where the rails go. And in order for us to live independent and free and expressive lives, I guess getting off those rails is important. And again, the right phrase, the right expression, the right approach to a person when you're coaching them is to get them off those rails. But then again, the culture is determined to keep us on the rails and to have us all doing the same thing. And that's what we would describe as being civilized, and of course, those sorts of things are not particularly helpful for an individual's expression and happiness and sense of purpose, particularly if they are quite free-thinking people or want to be. So finding a trauma that will bump you out of your everyday existence and cause you to have to think. I've just been reading about somebody walking the Appalachian Trail, and what the trauma for him was his wife died, and he had to take time to rethink it through, and he took all the time walking that 2,200 miles of trail across America. And he took to meet new people, to do new experiences. And I think that's what happened with me when I started coaching. Was I was working for this organization, and a group of people decided it was time for me to leave, so they made it hell for me to stay. And so suddenly I resigned, because I wasn't going to they'd picked the wrong bloke if they thought he'd just do what he was told. And because I operate according to my heart, where's my passion here? And so I resigned. And all of a sudden I stared into a black pit called family credit and housing benefit, and wondered what on earth I was going to do at 47 with the rest of my life. I had 2 children at university and one at sixth form. And all of a sudden I didn't have a job, Not only that, but my sense of purpose was all wrapped up in that job as well. So I had to reorientate, and that was a very demanding thing. It took time, and I was very glad, actually, not just for the money of the mundane jobs I got at that time, but for the time that I had to be able to do those mundane jobs and still be able to think myself through. And I'll never forget when I was at the meal table with our family and I said, I think I'm going to go into training and development. And my daughter, who was then, well, she would have been about 17. No, she would have been 19. So she was obviously home from university that day. She said, Dad, I think that's a really good idea. And it was absolutely retraining. I mean, I remember going into a bookshop in Cambridge, which I'd gone to see somebody in Cambridge, and walked into this book and walked into this shop and picked up this book, and it was NLP for trainers. And I don't know whether the people listening to this interview will understand neuro-linguistic programming. Now, there's all sorts of things, good and bad, about NLP. I'm not just giving a blanket approval here, because there are all sorts of people that use NLP for some, so it can be a very manipulative tool. It's like a very sharp knife, which can be used to injure or help people. But NLP for trainers. And I had no idea that books like this existed. This was completely new. And I had to read the book 2 or 3 times before I understood a lot of the words. Now, I'm a reasonably intelligent person. So having to grasp this, and I was in trauma, there's no question about it. And that trauma started forming the inside of me. It forced me to let go of things that I held on to. I will never forget a conversation I had with a man called Jim McNish, who was at the time running the body shop, the perfume and lotions and stuff store, the body shop, and it's a chain. And he said to me in his lovely Scots accent, he said, Andrew, what would it take for you to move from a position of knowing to a position of inquiry? And I said, I'm in a position of inquiry. And he said, that's a position of knowing. It completely took the wind out of my sails, because in the work that I'd been doing, everybody was looking to me for answers. They even wanted to know what God thought about things sometimes. And I just can't produce that. And I stood on the pavement outside our house here, and about 11 o'clock at night after a barbecue, when he'd been here for the barbecue, and I said, okay, help me. And he said, that's a position of inquiry. And in that few seconds, my brain changed.
Oh my
I have
goodness.
never been the same since. That simple question, what would it take for you to move from a position of knowing to a position of inquiry? I am in a position of inquiry. And of course, I didn't realize that I was in a position of knowing. I am in a position of inquiry. I know I'm in a position of inquiry. I know all these things. I've been doing these things. I'm 47. I know it all. Thank you. And to move to, and I found the words I don't know, some of the most lovely words in the book. People would say, what about so-and-so? What about this? Or what about, how does this work? How does, a bit like you, me, asking me all these questions today. And I'm thinking, I don't know. I've got some thoughts, and I've got some opinions and some ideas, and maybe they're right, maybe they're not right. But one thing's for sure, I'm going to pursue. And that pursuit of truth, I've just redone some of my stuff, and the 3 phrases I love, well, 3 words that I love are truth, love, and courage. Wow. And I call them my version of TLC, tender, loving care. Everybody says TLC is tender, loving care. But for me, it's truth, love, and courage. And when I'm working with a client, I'm looking for truth, love, and courage. I'm looking to promote truth, love, and courage with them.
Wow, that's
a very long answer to a very, very short question, though.
But I mean, thank you for this kind of answer, because now you got me thinking. And is this why you religiously almost hold on to your trips, where you just go out there in the nature, you want to assess everything?
Yeah,
how important is that, Andrew, for people? Because
I'm a strong believer. I've got a very strong faith, and I have I have a very strong belief in God. And it depends who I'm talking to, but some people say, so you get lonely out there on the road. And for those people who don't have any sort of faith or wouldn't relate to it, I say, oh, well, there's always me and the bike. We go where we want, or I'll say me and the camper. But actually, it's me and God inside my helmet. And that's the way I see it. People listening to this, what? But the truth is, those sorts of spiritual conversations, whether it's with a deeper part of you or whether it's with God out there, are very meaningful and very powerful conversations. And I have no doubt that the stuff that I produce in general, including the book I'm just writing at the moment, which is called Self-Worth Unlocked, I'm sure that those have got a sense of inspiration, creative inspiration from the God I worship, the creator of the universe, I would call him. But so that's for me personally. But I'm not projecting that on other people. But finding yourself in a wonderful inspirational relationship with that God inside my helmet or in my camper cat, I can't explain that. I'm not even going to try. I just think it is what it is, and it's life transforming for me.
Wow, that's amazing. And I heard one of the interviews like a few days ago. It says when somebody can't explain something, that is love.
I could do an entire hour on that for you, Doa, if you really want to. Yeah.
Oh, we were going to do that definitely in one of the other episodes, because I know there are people out there who would want to know more about and listen to more about this, Andrew. But I mean, circling back to what you mentioned regarding the you call it persistent unhappiness syndrome. This is your term. This is your expression.
Yep. Persistent unhappiness.
What is it? What is the persistent unhappiness syndrome, and what triggers it? What kind of behavior triggers that kind of syndrome, and what is it?
I think we need to understand that emotions are best described as a bodily sensation with a meaning attached. So if you have a bodily sensation where your body is pumping a certain amount of one sort of chemical into your body, you will describe that as fear. If it's pumping a different sort of chemical into your body and you will experience a different sensation, you will describe that as happiness or something else. But we tend to have a feeling in our bodies that we attach a label to. And then we have every possible explanation for how it got there and why it is we're thinking that way, etc., and all those things. So that what we're talking about is a physical sensation of unhappiness. The only reason that we know we are happy is because we experience unhappiness. So it's a very important thing to understand that to live a healthy life, we need to know what it is to be happy and what it is to be unhappy. Otherwise, happiness has no meaning for us because we can't compare it with anything. And by its very nature, it needs something to be bounced off. It needs a comparison. So in order for us to enjoy happiness, we have to have experienced unhappiness. The thing is, the persistent bit is persistent unhappiness is when we don't seem to be able to get away from the unhappiness. It's a bodily sensation that is persistent. It keeps on staying there. It won't move. And sometimes that's to do with our physical circumstances, our home, our family, a bereavement, a difficulty, a challenge, and all those sorts of things. Sometimes there's something that's not right in terms of the way we are free to run and play and live and do. And persistent unhappiness is generally speaking associated with some sort of fear. And it'll be a fear that we picked up when we were quite little very often. So I'm very interested when I'm working with a client as to what happens between the ages of 0 and 10. Sometimes it's somebody's experienced something at 15 or 12 or 13 or something like that. But generally speaking, it's in those very early years that we can explore that. So, and that's where they refer back to. They've never quite got over that. And the result of that is that a trauma in the past like that tends to lock us into the feelings that we had at the time and into the age that we were at the time, so that we stop growing up emotionally.
Oh.
You know, we haven't re-examined that emotion and added a different meaning to it, or played with it, or watered it down, or you can do that with all these internal bodily sensations. So that again is another area where coaching comes in, therapeutic coaching, and we can coach people beyond that. It's wonderful. It really, really works.
When you say
persistent unhappiness is a bodily sensation, and it's the persistent bit that's the challenge.
it's very hard. I mean, when you just said it now, persistently, that's super hard. When you say happiness and unhappiness, Andrew, does it mean happiness as per the person defines happiness, or as per what?
It's interesting you should say that, because I had a client recently who said to me that he was going through a tough time, and you can never get out of these things, can you? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, it's been going on for some time now. And I just recounted to him. I said, listen, you've got, and I listed 5 things that we'd already discussed about where his life was at the time now. And I said, those 5 things are pressing on you, and they're tough. You're going through a really tough time. What I can't do is I can't change that tough times, because actually we know as human beings that the place of greatest learning for us is in those tough times. It's tough. There's a chap in the States who I read years and years ago, and he wrote a book called Tough Times Never Last and Tough People Do. And so I just leaned across to my client and I looked him straight in the eye, as you do, Andrew. And I said, sounds pretty normal to me. I wouldn't want you to be happy in those times, because those times are designed, if you like, to cause you to rethink and to reorientate. And if everything's going on fine, we're not going to reorientate and rethink. We're not going to adjust our behavior. So why should we? Let's just carry on as normal. And what happens is we let ourselves get away with it, and we end up with an undisciplined life and general sort of mediocre happiness. And I don't think we really want that. Well, people who come to me don't want that, because not least they're paying for my treatment and they've decided they're going to invest some money in themselves. So that is definitely something we examine and think about.
Oh my goodness, what you just said is massive. Did you just say that in order to really experience happiness, you got to live through these moments of unhappiness and think thoroughly and deeply and take that experience to the fullest, so that you can naturally bounce back?
My friends, just when they talk about me, or when they talk about, they say Andrew doesn't do shallow. And the truth is, I don't do shallow. I'm not really interested in a shallow life. Where's the joy? Where's the contentment? Where's the richness? It's like saying, oh, well, we don't worry about very, very bland chocolate. We just leave it bland. It doesn't matter whether it's tasteless or not. And of course, none of us like that. We like chocolate that's got strong flavors and is rich and is interesting. But that only comes in life through tough times. Tough times never last, but tough people do. And my job when I'm working with clients is for them to come through that tough time. And lo and behold, this guy, of course, we both laughed at it.
Uh-huh.
He went out to his car and drove home, and we were laughing because he came in with these burdens, you could tell laughing, simply because we'd had an hour or so together, a couple of hours together. And so, and again, that again is part of good coaching for me. And I have the advantage, though, that I am not 25 anymore. I don't know whether you probably noticed that.
No, I haven't.
I've lost some hair, and I'm an older man, a granddad actually, and that is really useful, because as you look back over those years, you can see that there are tough times and good times, and times of enjoyment and fun with the children. Stu and I have just been away for a week visiting elderly relatives. We stayed with a lady who's 88, and but again, she is full of life, and she's got all this. She told me she takes books to the charity shop literally by the thousand. She said, I took another 1,000 books to the charity shop this week. So that, and I just think she's filled up. She was a junior school teacher for many years, and all her life. And again, she was just full of that sparkle that is just so important. But that's what takes you through, isn't it? And that is what older people have to offer younger people, is that perspective, which again is a cultural need today. In years gone by, grandparents and parents and children, young and old, were all bundled together more or less in the same house, certainly in the same village. Whereas today we don't have that, which is one reason why I run, after a person's seen me for 4 sessions, 5 sessions, something like that. I offer them what we call Friendship for Life program. And Friendship for Life is a monthly check-in with me. And you can see it on the website. I'm sure you'll stick my website up somewhere, no doubt. But again, that is an amazing time when people come in. It's fun, we have a great time. Yeah.
And so, like, when you said when people go through these hard times and tough times, this is exactly where the trauma happens, and where their thinking, sort of gets deeper. So for everybody who's watching us, for anybody who goes through like tough situations and they're like, they're okay, they're smiling, and from inside out, they're not noticing, they're not actually thinking about what's going on, as an extreme, versus somebody else on the other extreme who is like persistently unhappy. Both extremes are not right, are not healthy. Is this what you're saying?
I'm saying that may well work for some people, but it doesn't work for others. I think some people are very happy just to go with the status quo, just to go along with the crowd, just to say, be and do everything that's expected of them. And they're not really interested too much in muddying any waters, or peace at any price, just let it happen, go with the flow. And that's I'm not knocking that. It sounds like I am. Maybe I'm knocking that because I'm not that sort of person.
You are.
But people are very, I'm not responsible for the way a person lives their life. It's up to them if that's the way they want it to be.
Yeah.
However, I'd just like them to know there is something better out there for them. And it doesn't need to be like that. There are forces in our world that wants us to think like that, because ignorant people are easier to control, as somebody once said. And if you want to be just controlled, that's fine. But if you actually want to enjoy your freedom and enjoy your ability to stand up and take notice and make decisions for your life, then you can't just wander around like that. You will need to be taking some serious decisions, and those serious decisions will almost inevitably be challenging. You'll make mistakes, you'll hurt yourself, you may hurt other people, but the answer to that is that you'll bless so many more people in the process, because it's the ones that are strong and stand up and live with truth and love and courage that change the world. And anybody who's read history knows that the vast majority of people who have changed the world in any sort of way, whether socially, scientifically, or spiritually, have been absolutely torn apart during so much chunks of their life. They've been rejected. They've been objected to, badly treated, or burnt at the stake. Some of them, of course. And you can decide. I'm just going to be somebody who. Well, I wrote a poem about that once. Who will I be? Accept the doleful theory that there's two of me. So there's something that can take you beyond the average, the normal, the everyday, the whatever.
So it's more
so you can be fully yourself.
It's more of like knowing like where your happiness is. If your happiness is with that flow, then good, do it. If you feel you're doing like what everybody else is asking you to do, and for a reason you're not happy, you need to just take a step back and see why that is happening.
That's what coaching is about.
Yeah, that's what's exactly.
The interesting thing is you can't see it yourself usually.
Yeah.
And your best friends won't tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
Your family won't tell you. You'll need to find someone who is outside your world who will say, well, jump you off the rails. So many people around us have a vested interest in us staying on the rails, being steady and reliable and normal and average and all right and all those things. But that isn't really where the joy of living comes.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I love what you said right now. Exactly. The joy of living. I love that. All right. Now, if we go to all of the blogs and articles and, what you shared with the world regarding your thoughts on auto-response psychology. You're the author of that, right? Auto-response psychology.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So would you explain what does that mean?
We coined the phrase auto-response psychology. And so, in that sense, it's a bit like, discovering a brain pattern. We didn't create the brain pattern.
No.
Someone a little higher than ourselves, a little bit cleverer than ourselves created the brain pattern, but we identified it and labeled it. So, from that point of view, auto-response psychology is a trademark of power change.
What is it? Can you explain it to us, Andrew?
I was thinking about that earlier. Well, auto responses. Your brain has conscious responses where ask me a question and I answer the question, and that'd be a conscious response. But the backstory, the unconscious stuff, the auto response is stuff that I've got into the habit of just saying or just doing, or where I'm driven by something automated, if you like. The word auto just means it does it by itself, like an automatic gearbox is something that automatically changes gears by itself. It doesn't need intervention from outside. So, and what we're talking about is where our brains just run on automatic. Auto-response psychology. And what we do is we show you how that's working and help you to reprogram it. So because you can also create auto responses, which is what habit forming is about, if you think about it. But so many of those auto responses need a minor trauma, sometimes just a conversation in here, to actually to get to the stage where that person looks at you and says, I'll never think that again. I'll never be able to go down that route again. I've never, ever, ever seen that. Because, of course, it's new information, new knowledge about ourselves and our world that causes us to change direction to what we say, good, safe, possible for me, worth it, best and right. I'll just say that again. Good, safe, possible for me, worth it, best and right. That is what helps us to make decisions.
I love that.
If something's good, safe, possible for me, worth it, best and right, we will normally go for it. But if we realize that what we've got is not good, safe, possible for me, worth it, best and right, then that's when we're ready for a change. So
it's like you ask them the questions which they never asked themselves, their family never asked them, their friends, which actually helps them think, because obviously they're not giving themselves enough space to think and see if what they're doing right now is all of these, like, good, safe, possible for me, and
Worth it, best
worth
and
it,
right.
best and right.
You're getting it, darling. Getting it.
I'm getting there.
Good, safe, possible for me. Worth it, best and right.
Worth it,
Those are the key things to do with how we will respond to a person. So let me show you. You know, you meet a person on the street, and they remind you of your granny. Oh, I'll give you an actual illustration. Somebody who was working out in a forest and was enjoying forestry. I'm not knocking forestry in the comment by any means, but in conversation, it came out that they were badly treated by somebody in a suit, a grey suit. And at the time, you know, the normal thing in offices that was grey suits. Everybody wore a grey suit, so they didn't want to be anywhere near all the grey suits.
Offices.
So they decided that they would put on green clothes and be out in the forest. You see?
Yeah.
Now that's a classic example of an auto response. They, you know, I'm not suited to. I'm not suited to office work. I know I would never want to go into a conference room like that. Thank you very much. And it wasn't the stuff that was going to stretch their brain or the appropriateness of the work. It was the fact that the room was full of grey suits, and they couldn't bear the grey suits. And so they had an auto response to it. You know, they automatically responded no. Now they had no idea that it was the grey suits that did. They just thought, oh no, I don't want an office job. Even though the office job was going to be much more demand and much more fulfilling for them, and to stretch them and take them out into the forest, but incidentally, by the way. But you know, and they would be doing all sorts of things and have a lot more control and influence as to what was happening out in the forests and those sort of things. They'll be telling people out in the forest what to do, for instance. Yeah. But the auto response was no. But as it became clear that it was the grey suits that they were struggling with, not the office.
Oh my goodness, so subtle.
Yeah, they thought this is absolutely ridiculous. I don't want to live like that. And what they realised was that trauma, which they'd had years before when they were a young teenager, had affected that they were still behaving like that young teenager.
Oh.
So they grew up emotionally, so that they could be the 30-something woman she was. And all of a sudden, when she made that decision, I'm not going to have my life pushed around, that bodily sensation. I'm not going to have that bodily sensation pushed around by a young teenage girl who had a bad experience. That's ridiculous. I want to respond like I am now, an adult woman. And lo and behold, that changed everything.
Oh.
Freedom. Freedom. It's like I'm not being pushed around by a bad trauma from the past.
It's like being held back by limiting beliefs and causing irrational decisions to be made and opportunities to be lost just because they were held back by that auto response that they had.
Yes, the challenge is you don't know.
You know,
the challenge is you are completely unaware. You know you've developed a behavior that's not working for you, but you have absolutely no idea how it got there or how to get rid of it.
Or that it's there.
Or even that it's there. Yeah. Oh, no, I only like working outside in the forest. So what would, you're not going to get any promotion out there, are you? What about this and what about that? There are people the other way around. There are people, I was speaking to a guy the other day who was, he was out managing laying the road outside a house and laying the tarmac on the blacktop. And he said, oh, no, I worked in an office for however long. Because he had in his head that going out and working with the workforce outside was demeaning in some way, or he'd been told that you can see how that works. He's working backwards. And so he came out of the office after something like 11, 15 years and started working out. And he said, I love it out here now. I was talking to him over our date. And so you see how these things work, can't you?
I can think of so many people reacting the way you just described. I need to even sit down and think where I act like this, because you got me thinking right now. It's very interesting. All right.
Well, people find themselves in jobs that are so completely unsuited to them, and work there with the complete. And a classic example of people who are very, very resistant to going self-employed or becoming entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
Oh no! What happens if you don't have any money? And my immediate response to I don't necessarily say this straight away. I think, oh, does this person come from a poor background? You see, because if you experienced a lot of poverty and you were hungry because you didn't have enough money, then you're going to be very sure that the association that you've had with poverty is you're hungry. And hungry feeling, serious hunger. I'm not talking about people who have only had 2 meals a day. I'm talking about people who haven't had a meal in 2 days or 3 days. You know, and suddenly that they've associated not having money with, or all their friends at school had this, and this, and they could never have it. I had to work through that myself, because I tended to be, because our family was very poor. I came from a country farm, and things were really tough for my family, who were on the verge of bankruptcy for quite a long time. And I wore a lot of secondhand clothes, to the extent, even though they were girls' clothes, but my Mac, I remember my Mac buttoned up both ways, but the thought that a girl had been wearing it didn't. You see? And
no discrimination here. Everybody's just Andrew being himself. Yeah.
No, I'd just like to point out, I don't mean borrowed clothes now. So
yeah.
But you can see how something very simple, and when you're a little child, if you're talking very, very bright children with a very high IQ, 130, 150, they pick up much more at a much early stage. So the people who I work with in here are very often very bright, very sensitive people, and what they do is they make 1 + 1 equal anything you want. They don't make it equal 2. They make it equal something else. So they'll take this situation and this situation, and they'll put them together, and they'll produce something created in their brain that's got nothing to do with the reality of this or this. That's what happens that's because they're very clever, and their brains make all sorts of connections. And of course, when we're young, we don't have the time or the knowledge, the background knowledge, to make more accurate connections. And that is one of the things that causes damage in a person's life.
If they do not come in the right time. I mean, probably their cleverness has made them think in a way like, I need help. I need somebody to help me. So, I mean.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. However, if you've got a father, it's usually a father figure, sometimes it's a mother, but if you've got a father figure who says, we don't go to other people, we're not dependent on them. Well, you just need to think your own thoughts and get yourself sorted out here. You see, when you're a little child, 6, 7, 8, you don't have the wherewithal to be able to withstand that kind of psychological impact. And you go, oh, right. You see, and so the tendency to ask for help goes out the window, because you see asking for help as something that's threatening instead of something.
Oh my goodness. That's so deep.
It's not rocket science, is it? But what happens is we pick up these little beliefs. The thing is, we don't notice them. We don't see them. It isn't until somebody comes and sits in here, and they may be very bright people who have done, well, I've just had a woman in here recently who has been seeing a counsellor for 2.5 years. And again, she says, we're doing stuff in there, and my counsellor didn't get anywhere near. And I said, no, it's because I'm a bit more ruthless than a counsellor. but the whole, asking those questions and digging around and finding those little things in an unthreatening but direct way, I won't let people, if somebody goes quiet or changes the subject, I'll say, oh, no, I'm not going there. That's a rabbit. That's a little rabbit run. We're not going out there. Let's just come back. Let me ask that question again. and again, it brings truth in a loving atmosphere. You can understand that I'm a very loving person, really, and but I'm also courageous, and coaching requires courage. If you're going to be a good coach, you need to be courageous.
Well, coaching definitely requires courage to be impactful. But what does it take for somebody to change, Andrew? Really change?
Well, of course, I'm going to ask the question: change what?
Change a pattern.
What you just described to me is what I call an incomplete sentence.
Change a pattern that is working against their happiness.
Well, the answer to that is find yourself a really good coach and come and see me. What does it take for a person to change? I think they have to realize that there's a price to be paid. And I don't mean a monetary price. Then there will be a loss in that change. Maybe initial comfort. It may be something financial. It may be that they will lose their job. But most, if you take a look at a tick, it goes down and then up. There's a little bit of down and an awful lot of up. That is the nature of a tick. So if you're going to get it right with a tick, there's going to be a little bit of down and a lot of up. So, but people look at the little bit of down and they think, oh no, thank you, I'm not going to do it down. It's because they can't see far enough ahead. And I would say probably that's one of the reasons that people struggle with changing, is because letting go of the status quo demands faith. And the faith is that it's going to get better.
Yeah. And courage. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I say to the coaches, because I've trained hundreds of coaches now, and one of the things I say to them is, no, your clients won't change because they believe they will. Your clients will change because you believe they will.
Yeah, they can't.
And they say, what do you mean? It's not dependent on the client anymore. You say, no, it's not dependent on the client, because the client can't always see that far ahead.
Oh.
So when somebody calls to me and talks to me and says, what about this and what about that? I'll say, oh, yes. And I'll say, because I've been doing it for so long now. I've been coaching people for 25 years as a professional job. And I'll say, oh, no. So I had so-and-so doing this, and that's what happened. And then I'll describe somebody else who's happened, and somebody else has happened. And slowly but surely, their confidence and their belief that there is an upstroke to the tick, well, actually, yes.
Oh.
But there's always a price to pay. Even the attention that they're going to give, well, it's going to cost them time. It's going to cost them 8 hours of their time to come and see me. It's going to cost them a chunk of money to come and see me. But it's going to cost more than that. It may well cost, it may mean they have to apologize to somebody, or they may need to admit they're wrong about something. And that, of course, is perceived initially as a cost. But actually, we've got very clever ways of making sure that doesn't feel like a cost at all.
As a loss.
Sorry?
As a loss sometimes to people.
Yeah, well, you're losing something you never wanted anyway. It's like pride, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pride is something that none of us likes to lose, but none of us wants to get rid of. We don't like proud people, but we don't want to get rid of the pride ourselves. So, well, I didn't quite say that right, but it'll do. None of us. No, again, whatever it was, but pride is one of those things that we don't like to lose, but we don't actually want to keep it either. It's interesting.
Yeah, especially like when you mentioned, because like I run into a lot of people who are transitioning and becoming new entrepreneurs, or maybe changing something about their business. And it becomes very easy for you when you are there for a longer time, that you can actually see that they're hitting a wall very early on. They're not seeing beyond. They're like, what is this not working for me? And they sort of freeze.
Yeah, they probably haven't got desperate enough yet.
Yeah. Is that one of the things that's going to make them change?
Or they're depending on their husband or their wife's income, and it doesn't really matter. whether they make a really good business or not. You know, when I was doing it, it had to work.
I know how that is.
It absolutely, I had to do whatever it took. And yeah, that's one reason why we admire people who've done things physically to an extreme. You know, people who've rowed across the Atlantic or whatever it is. You know, when you're in the middle of the Atlantic, you can't really say, I'm just going to go back. You know, you've got to keep going. You know, so it doesn't matter whether the mast is broken or whether, you know, you're cold or whether walking the AT, you know, that man I was telling you about in the beginning of this conversation. You know, he just set that goal, and boy, he wasn't going to move from it. He was going to be there. And of course he did, through thick and thin. And it is to do with that thick and thin. It is when Sue and I got married, one of the things that Sue said, she said, well, we're getting married on the basis that there's no handle on the inside of the door.
Well done, Sue.
Well, you have to bear in mind she was only 18 at the time,
Oh,
and I was 21. So, you know, but there's no handle on the inside of the door. And that absolutely forbidding ourselves to entertain the thought of separation or divorce or whatever. I'm not knocking other people who've made that. I'm just simply saying this is the way it worked for us, meant that when things didn't go wrong, and I have to admit, you know, she was not always right. I'm joking, right? Because I'm not always right about a long, long way. And she's paid a far higher price being married to me than I have been married to her, I have to say. But you see how, you know, you have to work through these things, and
following through until they get to actually really change their pattern, doing it anyways. And this is what exactly a coach does: is keep.
In the Bible, it talks about no man building a tower starts without thinking of the whole cost. And, you know, when you start building a tower, you know, or a house or a castle or whatever you want to build, it's a good idea to have the finances sorted out before you start.
Yeah, or a relationship.
Yes, and for a relationship, that's exactly the same. So count the cost. And decide at the very beginning that you're going to pay it.
Yeah.
You know, well, you know, don't leave yourself let out quarters. Don't leave little loopholes that you might escape through. And that's another thing that we do with coaching and I'll make sure that I see those loopholes if they don't see them. Okay, so what happens if this doesn't happen then? What happens if you can't get that loan? Well, I've got to get the loan. No. Banks don't work on the basis of I've got to get the loan. You know, there's that. What are you putting together to make sure you get that loan?
Yeah.
What happens if you can't get? So, how will that affect your entire future life? You know, when you've said, "Oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that," and your friends realize that you're not going to do it, what are you going to tell that? What relationship do you have with them that enables them to support you and take you through those tough times? You know, there are so many questions that coaching involves and things like that. And again, you know, well, I said to you, know, we can't see them ourselves. That is the sad thing. We can't just live an independent life. Even people who have chosen to be hermits and live in the middle of a wood with nobody around them, eventually they have to depend on somebody for something.
Absolutely.
And that's the nature of a good coach, particularly in these days.
What about the genetic pressure, Andrew? The genetics, the what is it? Whatever is engraved in our bones, the way of thinking that is there in the genes, the behavior that is there, you know, since our ancestors.
I've heard people.
What do you do about this?
I've heard people use that as an excuse. Well, that's just the way I'm made.
But is it real? Is that real?
Well, genetics gives us strengths and weaknesses, a tendency towards something or a tendency away from it. in general, it's not possible to say one totalitarian in every situation, but very, very few people are the 0.01%. For the majority of us, we have tendencies towards things and strengths and weaknesses, so which are genetic, like color blindness or the height I am or not. So the secret is, what is my attitude to those things going to be? Am I going to allow those things to dictate my future life, or am I going to say, well, actually, I have a tendency towards that? Alcoholism would be a classic example. Smoking would be another one, where genetically, by the way, it's now becoming more and more clear that some of the very strongly created traumatic habits that we have can affect the future generations' genes. That's a massive issue. And when you start thinking about it, you think, is it possible that me smoking can cause my children to have a weakness towards smoking? Those are the things that we've always said, my behavior is never going to make any difference. So if I develop a culture around myself of bitterness, how is that going to affect the genetic makeup of my grandchildren? Those are questions. Well, I can't remember what your question was now, but anyway.
My question was very relevant to what you were just saying, because I was asking, when people go through change, is the genetic real?
So I'm not a specialist in genetics. It would be foolish of me to pretend I was. But however, I do know that the genetics tends to produce our strengths and weaknesses. So if we have a strength, we can go with that, and it's easier for us. If we have, here's a classic example. If you're a very tall person, it's fairly easy to develop a tendency to be able to put things on the top shelf and get them down again.
Yeah.
If you're very short, you're going to be wanting a lower countertop, so that you tend to have things lower down. So all those things are genetic, but it's up to us to decide how we're going to deal with that. So if we want to have high cupboards and we're short, then we have a little step in the kitchen or the worktop or whatever it is, so that we can reach it, so we can use those genetic things to make us stronger, make us more creative, make us more useful, all those things. So whether you regard height as a strength or a weakness will depend entirely on your background. Did your mum say, well, the trouble is you're too short? Really? So strengths and weaknesses are very odd. Genetically, we love to blame them because there's nothing we can do about it, so it must be genetic.
Oh my gosh. So it's like acknowledging the strength or weakness. That's number one, recognizing it's there, and then building an attitude towards it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And what's my attitude going to be to the things I'm naturally strong and weak about? If I'm colorblind, am I going to say, the thing is, I'm not a very good person, I can't do this because I'm colorblind? Or you can say, colorblindness, that's interesting. I'm going to find a machine that tells me what colors are.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to make sure that I have friends around me when it's really important or I'm going to learn to drive and recognize stop signs and traffic lights and all those things, and I have to accommodate that. That makes me stronger. Because I've got a challenge there that I have to overcome, and it's a challenge I have to overcome every day. So that again is a very interesting one, isn't it?
So can we actually reverse the genes if we change our attitude? Can we biologically, in a way, reverse these genes, or is it like enhancing them or weaken them?
Well, we have come from a medical environment or research environment that has, for decades and decades, hundreds of years, said, you can't change that. However, in the last 20 years, 30 years, we've been saying, actually, there's more and more evidence that you can change some of that stuff. One of them is to do, it's not quite the same thing, but it's to do with plasticity of the brain. We used to say, once you've got brain damage, that's it. No. Brain damage is one thing, but for time and time again, you can relearn stuff. You can recircuit your brain. Your brain is a very, very clever and plastic thing. So you can develop it and it takes. Now, genetics is tending more towards that, it would seem to me. But again, that's exciting, isn't it? You know, that's
very.
I'm not at the beck and call of my genetic makeup.
Absolutely. This is very interesting because, I mean, now that does not leave an excuse for anybody to go and blame their habitual, actions or reactions. But this is the way we all are. This is the way it is in the family. It runs in our genes. This is not real.
The answer to that is yes, I agree with that. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is about acceptance. If you can't change something you don't own. So I might want to change my car, and I can change my car because I own it. But I can't change somebody else's car because I don't own it.
Exactly.
Okay. So if we want to change our behavior, one of the first things that's important is to own it. Yes, this is my behavior. This is how I've been. So one thing, you can't start adjusting or adapting your colorblindness if you don't say, actually, I'm colorblind. Do you see what I mean? However, owning it is what's important. And by the way, you can't change your behavior unless you own it. That's one of the things that we've discovered about people who say, oh, well, I'm a kleptomaniac. I can't just help taking things. I tend to steal other people's as well. I can't help it. It's in my genes. Well, what happens in our big wide world is if you won't help it yourself and it's damaging the community and society, then the community and society starts taking responsibility for your weaknesses and starts putting you in prison for it. Because the issue is, it may be that you can't, you need to change something, but the issue is whether you are going to own it or not, because you can't change something you don't own.
Absolutely. I want to ask you this question, Andrew. Who has helped you? Obviously, you have your very huge experience and your own way of helping people own who they are and get to where they want. Who has helped you be who you are today?
When I was 24, I heard a man preach. And I never heard him before. I never met him before. I was at a church near us, and my background is a faith community. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, look, I don't think I need any counselling or anything like that, but I'd just like to spend some time with you. He was 56. His name was Campbell McAlpine. And he had been a major in the army, but don't hold that against him, as they say. But he was a lovely man, and he said, how about 6 o'clock tomorrow morning? Now, I just said, okay, where? Because I thought he was serious, and I wanted to spend some time with him, which meant I remember getting up at 5:30 thinking, I hope he was serious, because, but I was outside his house at 6 o'clock the next morning, and he walked out the door, and there I was. And we walked along the seafront for 2 hours.
Wow.
And every Monday morning for the next 4.5 years. And he absolutely changed my life. He was the dad that my dad could never be. My dad came from quite a damaged background and gave it life his best shot. And he was a very kind and generous and good person. But he could not quite handle Andrew in the way that Andrew needed to be handled. And Campbell did that. And after 4.5 years, Campbell went abroad for a bit and came back, and we picked up where we left off. And so for 35 years, I was mentored by the same. By the way, without any expectation from him, I gave him 1/10 of my income.
Oh my goodness, that's beautiful.
I gave him 1/10 of my gross income. And so every month, I gave him 1/10 of my income. And he was amazing, absolutely amazing. Criticism, I never, well, that's not true. twice in that time, I heard him criticizing people.
Oh my God, 4 years and a half.
Twice,
4 years and a half every day,
Yeah.
6 a.m. That's
Yeah.
huge. That's a huge
Every Monday morning, one day.
every Monday morning.
But and we would talk about anything. I could talk to him about anything. And he was never shocked. He was never surprised. He was never disappointed. He just loved me. He used to call me one of his boys, which is lovely as well. But I mean, he died at the age of 92, and for the last few years, I'd see him sort of once a month, once every 2 months, something like that. But that relationship continued for 35 years.
Was that your
And
first
now-
real life example of what coaching is?
Yes.
Wow.
And the point is, when I'm working with clients, I was talking about our Friend for Life program. I'm not talking about something I haven't done myself.
Ah.
This was a life-changing experience for me, and it really was. I look back on it now and I think I keep finding little phrases of Campbell's dropping into my conversation because, when you're with a person that you love and who loves you that much, something happens in terms of your desire to imitate them. And of course, that's what I wanted. I wanted to be like him. Every now and again, I would pray that I would receive a double portion of his spirit. And every now and again, I can see a little bit of the first portion. But anyway, he was an amazing person. And he died of cancer in old age. But he changed my life. And there have been other individual people like that. My mum would be a classic example. She died at 101.
Wow.
But she was a stunningly gracious person. Maybe she needed to be particularly gracious with a son like Andrew. But she was an amazingly gracious person. She always saw the best in people. She always loved people. She was always generous with her time. She served the community. She was an open-hearted, generous, very spiritual woman. And then again, you look back on it and you think, where would I have been without my mother?
She's my mom.
And even when I had, when I was 40, I'm 73 now, but when I was 40, I had a breakdown kind of thing. And I just realized then just how understanding and compassionate and loving and kind and gentle she was, and just what I needed at the time, to be honest.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, amazing.
She saved you in that situation in particular, you think?
Oh yeah, I was suicidal at one point. So
Oh my God.
yeah, so you look back on that and you think, you asked me about people who influenced me, who have been most important, and I would say probably my mum and Campbell. Campbell was the dad that my dad could never be, however hard he tried. He didn't have what it took. So, and it's not right to expect something of people that they can't give. That's a very cruel thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by the way, Dad would be the first person to recognize that that's what Campbell was to me. Dad was very humble, and again very generous.
Like he was a coach before the term coach was even
Yes, absolutely right. That's what I think when we hear are you a life coach? That's what the people say to me.
Life coach. Exactly.
Are you a life coach?
Not just for a couple of hours. That's life coach. Exactly.
And I think probably not. Because I don't do shallow, I do very deep. And I'm looking at all the qualities and characteristics and ambitions and desires and lovingly asking questions. I get paid for asking questions, that's what happens. But they're not just questions to fill in information bits. They're questions that are going to be life-changing questions.
What is it, Andrew? What is your deepest motive? The way that you, interact with people is not like a formal relationship or like, a box professional relationship. What is the deepest motive that you have that makes you feel that you are compelled? Because that's the way I see it from the outside. You're compelled. You feel like you always want to do that with huge passion. So what is it that makes you feel compelled to help people the way you do?
I want to answer that question, but the truth is it gets me deep down inside, and I feel emotional answering it. I can feel myself getting emotional even as we're talking about these things. And I have a very, very strong sense of purpose. And that sense of purpose is to really bring pleasure to God. But having said that, I know what brings him pleasure. And what brings him pleasure is to see us loving and caring for each other as a world. And I struggle with that sometimes because I'm not naturally a loving person in so many ways. But the truth is I love my clients. Some of them aren't very lovable when they start off coming to me, and that's just fine because, that's the reason they're in my chair, is because they're struggling with themselves. They don't love themselves, so maybe other people don't love them too well, and they want to get past that. But you talk about my personal motivation. Now, all my clients have different motivations, so I'm not dumping my motivation on top of them by any means. But I remember when I was at a training course one day. It wasn't a training course I was running, although I did that for 10 years. I ran coach training program for 10 years. But it was when I was training myself, my learning information, that one of the questions they asked me was, this sort of thing as, what motivates you? What do you want to go for in the future? What's your number one goal? And my number one goal actually is, because I'm a Christian, I've got every faith and belief in heaven. There's no guarantee. I can't say heaven is this or that. It's definitely going to. Because this is a faith step. I'm not naive. And but in my head, I can imagine God as when I enter heaven in my old age, looking at me and saying, "Well done, Andrew." And I would say that is my number one motivation. Now, I don't have any doubt that God is going to say that already. I don't have to do any more in my life. I don't have to do any more to bring him pleasure. But all I just think is anything now I do is a bonus. And I just think, isn't it amazing? You can bring gifts to the creator of the universe. And that gift is doing a little bit more for that person, or loving that somebody in a different way, asking that question,